Hey.
Hi, Katie.
Hi.
Hi, Hassan.
Hassan doesn't want to be seen or heard. Sorry I missed today's call, but it seemed like it was for the best anyways.
Yeah, I found myself in my car. I couldn't get to the website that showed the requirements, so we just figured it's better since you were having issues as well. Everything okay?
Yeah, totally. We just had one of our full-time employees tell us that he's leaving at the end of January. So it's sad, but totally fine,
Yeah.
But I got the news at 10:43 and I was like, well, I'm really sad. I can't talk right now about this stupid Kaufman grant. Not that I think it's stupid. I think it's great.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, Dia.
Hello.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. It's nice to see you.
Good to see you again.
Is Celia here now?
Scott Resnick
There she
here.
is.
Hey, Scott. It's Katie.
Look at all these beautiful faces. Who is it? 608.
It's Scott
Scott
Resnick.
Resnick, is that you? Hang on.
It is him.
Okay.
Kate just has my number memorized. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
Or we live in the same zip code or area code. Either one.
It can be both.
Or she's a stalker. That could be the case too. Which I know she's not. Hi, Dia. I haven't seen you in a while. Okay. I'm going to make, who's going to take notes and be the lead? Because I have to hop onto another call. So is that you, Beth?
I think between Katie and Hassan and I, we can go ahead and lead, but we do need a volunteer to take notes.
Okay. And I'm going to make you host so that I can get off the call and onto another one. So, and then I haven't heard from Eric, but I don't know if he's in transit. So.
Thanks, Katie.
No problem.
Yeah, I had talked to Eric last week digitally.
Okay.
And assume he's going to be on to give us the update on Goal 5.
Otherwise, you have Scott to entertain and inform you, because that's always good too.
Absolutely.
So I made you the host. Thank you all for being here. I am going to hop on another call, but I'm going to let you all. It's recording, and hang on. It's not recording. You need to hit record, Beth. I thought, oh no, it is recording.
Yeah, it says
Sorry.
it's recording.
Okay. All right. And happy holidays, everyone.
Safe travels to you.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful time.
See you soon.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay. So thanks everybody for being here. It's just a little bit after 1. It's about 1:04. So I think we should, to be cognizant of everybody's time, let's go ahead and get started. Does everyone have access to the agenda? It came out in the email this morning from Syria.
I got to get to it, but I have it.
Okay. So we want to, anybody have a good idea for a popcorn question? Why don't we say, let's talk about what is your most rewarding role as an entrepreneurial ecosystem builder? And I will start, let's start with Scott.
Oh, that is a really tough question. What is my most fulfilling? Do you want to repeat the question? Most fulfilling role as an entrepreneur ecosystem builder, or most rewarding?
Right.
So, I have over the past. I started doing this 2 years ago, where I have started collecting the number of times where I've either introduced someone to their first line of investment or introduced them to their a first major sale of a particular product. That number is now above 30, which I'm fairly happy with over 2 years. I've continued to do that, but like hearing from another entrepreneur that I was the reason their company either found funding or sort of has taken off has been probably the most rewarding experience personally.
That's an awesome one.
Yeah.
Who are you going to popcorn to have followed that one?
I am not online, so I can't see all the names on the chat. So I will let you pick a popcorn for me.
All right, let's go with Katie.
All right. The most rewarding thing for me as an ecosystem builder is making connections between people who I think should know each other, whether it's within the same city or some sector or something like that. Because I think we spend so much time working on our own work that we don't often get the opportunity to meet people who are doing really relevant things that could expand our way of thinking or be just great partners in some way. And people are always like really surprised and grateful, and it makes me feel like I have a lot of value. I'll go with Hassan.
Hey, thanks, Katie. I think we're all ecosystem builders and doing the thing that I think reminds me that we are all ecosystem builders and doing the right thing is that we all think similarly. So I was actually thinking the exact same thing that Katie just said, finding people in the ecosystem that were not connected and should be connected, and then just make the connection. That to me is probably one of the things. And I think there's only, there's Beth left, and so I'll popcorn over to Beth.
Okay. I think the most rewarding part of being an entrepreneurial ecosystem builder is, besides making those connections and really seeing the fruits of those connections, it's also just discovering other ecosystem builders, like getting introduced to the ESHIP community and being part of these calls, and just being part of an emerging professional field is something most people don't get to do. So, and I will popcorn over to Dia.
Thank you, Beth. I absolutely agree with the connecting part. I think that's one of the biggest things, and also really grateful to find this community. For me, it hasn't been a long time, but I really enjoyed that I have been able to help a lot of different diverse entrepreneurs, especially with those who are underlooked or overlooked rather. So that has been very fulfilling for me.
Awesome, thank you. So with that said, and that was nice and short and sweet for today, on the agenda, I'm trying to find where it is, but it looks like our agenda might be a little bit discombobulated. I think let's talk real quick right now, if we can, any updates on any of the initiatives under Goal 6? Does anyone have an update they'd like to share?
I can. I talked to Scott a couple weeks ago, interviewed him about sort of his process around Starting Block and the entrepreneurial ecosystem he's built here in Madison in regards to sort of the global awareness campaign. I think it's 6.2. So I still need to type that up and run it by him before I share it with the group, and that might take a couple weeks still, but I have the interview done and I'm hoping to share it soon. And Scott, thanks again for your time on that.
Absolutely.
That's awesome. Would either of you mind sharing a couple highlights?
It's a lot to ask, Beth. Well, I think the thing that I took away from it was there wasn't some explicitly financed campaign behind what they did in Madison, but it was sort of this snowball effect of getting the different and right kinds of partners involved, which and just like the length of time that it took to do that, because it's such a different approach to how funders and supporters and organizations are used to working. So that was kind of my big takeaway. Scott, did you have anything to add about what you said?
Yeah, so the big piece with Starting Block, I would say that the two big components. One, it took critical mass of the community. So if you're not familiar, Starting Block is a 50,000 square foot tech incubation space in Madison, Wisconsin. Kate actually works out of the space, so it was easy to find time to meet and talk about it. It was a new construction, really with the goal to be the beacon of the Madison entrepreneur community. And if anything, one, it was the critical mass. I mean, it's a project that took almost 7 years from the point that we had the idea to actually executing. It had a number of roadblocks and hurdles along the way. But it was once the community reached a particular plateau, it was the right time and we had the right momentum behind the project. The other big component was, unlike other centers, which we profiled well over 100 prior to opening our center, it was very much driven by entrepreneurs themselves. And I think one of the fundamental differences is it wasn't government-led, it wasn't university-led. It truly was from folks who were entrepreneurs. So it has a different feel, different struggles than other centers, but creates a different mentality to the center itself.
Yeah, and that's really evident, like in the place itself. It's just who is there and why they're using the space.
Very awesome. Anybody else have any updates around 6.2 or any of the initiatives? So what are they? 6.1 is the development of messaging templates that any ecosystem builder can use to help gain universal support. Thing 6.2 is all around the global awareness campaign. What is 6.3 and 6.4? I don't have them in front of me.
I'm opening it up. 6.3 is ecosystem building programming for existing conferences, which I think has sort of become almost in Celia's bucket to some extent, in all of our buckets. 6.4 is public policy playbooks, which I think again is kind of interwoven in the 0.1 and 0.2 a lot as well. And then 6.5 is the activating local foundations in support of entrepreneurship.
Okay. So I guess when we were discussing last call around activating local foundations, we had discussed, talking to someone at Kauffman and probably Andy in particular with regard to Kauffman's ability to act maybe again as the convener of other foundations across the country in support of entrepreneurial ecosystem building. And I have not been able to get a hold of Andy, and Celia had said basically there's talk around the what was it called, the Entrepreneurial Funders Network, but nothing public or specific. So I don't think there's a lot going on about that, but I think having Andy or someone appropriate to come on the call at some point just to talk to us about their position and what their thoughts are around getting foundations activated.
That would be really helpful. We talked in the past about how as individuals who aren't associated with foundation, we probably carry less clout, interest by the other foundations, but maybe if someone like Kauffman could convene them or ask their opinion.
Right. And you guys can help me remember, but we were also talking about the importance of all of the other goals being achieved and to support the needs that we have in the universal support goal area. And we talked about how important the impact metrics are, and we all came to the conclusion that we'd love to hear what's happening with Goal 5 group, which is around that. And Eric Whitmore was going to join us to talk about the progress that Goal 5 has made. I don't see him yet, and maybe some got pulled away. But Scott, you had talked about sharing with us how you guys manage your metrics and storytelling concurrently there in Madison. Did you want to jump in and give us some info on that?
Yes. Sorry, I'd be happy to share about our metrics. So we have at Starting Block 54 separate metrics that we actually use to collect on every company that is coming through our center, plus additional metrics that we carry from any of our ecosystem partners. We started doing this off of UBI's metric set, which I am blanking, unless someone else remembers off the top of their head what UBI stands for, not Universal Basic Income, but a global initiative to collect data of entrepreneurial hubs. And we use that information primarily to leverage our funders of our sponsorship and capital campaign funders. So we are a little bit unique in how we raised funds to fund the project itself. We ended up getting we had to have a $10 million campaign for the Starting Block facility. From that, we're still not allowed to disclose the amount of corporate gifting from one particular company, which is American Family Insurance. But beyond their gift, we had to raise an additional $3 million, which came from primarily half from city and state entities, and then the other group from local foundations and primarily philanthropic activities. So our metrics that we carry are primarily around job creation, sales from the company, revenue lines, fundraising activity, new clients. So we have a whole host of metrics. One of the things that we do, and I think this is somewhat different, is we try to cultivate as strong of relationships we can with our entrepreneurs. And we've actually had a very high success rate of companies sharing their data, including data that I would consider at the highest level of confidentiality, including sales and revenue numbers. We then aggregate those data sets and then share from our community how various performances work. We then use that very regularly in January and February, sharing both with our donors, our sponsors, and then to the general community, how many jobs were created, net new jobs created out of the center, how many companies have raised venture-backed funding, and what some of our alumni raise. This is only our second year, but I'm anticipating, we'll usually see from our companies somewhere between $15 and $30 million raised from venture. Those companies will do probably around under $50 million in early sales, and the ideal is to continuously get our alumni as well. So companies have left the center being able to share what the net effect and impact has been. So that's how we generally use metrics. And after the call, I'd be happy to share sort of the infographic that we have created around that pretty much gets pretty widely shared. And again, this was year one. Some of the lessons that we learned from that process is you have to essentially go through it once to be able to see all the questions that you wish you asked. We ended up having a fair amount of why we don't have our partner data is because we didn't find a great way to standardize that across our 13 partners inside Starting Block. We really wrote it for one organization, and the other 12 gave varying responses to that data. However, I'm looking forward to our surveys in year 2.
Scott, could you tell us like what kind of partners you're talking about?
Yes, so we have inside Starting Block, it is essentially an incubation space. So currently we have around a little under 40 primarily tech companies, but not exclusively tech companies inside the space. We also have 3 venture funds and 13, I would put them in the bucket of ecosystem builders. So we have an organization called Generator, which is an actual tech accelerator that has multiple classes each year. We have the Doyen Group, which focuses on women and underrepresented entrepreneurs. We have Bunker Labs, which focuses on veteran entrepreneurs. And then a handful of smaller organizations as well that are providing essentially programming through the general Starting Block community. So trying to get everyone to share their data in an honest way is really, really challenging. I won't, because we have one person from Madison on the call, I don't like sharing any of the the drama of the community. But we did have one partner who is a major partner in the center who basically just said, no, we are not sharing our data. And we did not anticipate that as a response to our request. So, although we are one large organization, we still have a very decentralized culture, that meant you had to be, sharing honest information. We had another tech company that we asked everyone to submit their performance, and I can tell you they made up all of their data. They had not, I was just, going into their office and saying, so you submitted this as your amount of venture capital raised and the number of jobs created, and just sharing like, there is no way you created this many jobs. Do you know, and, trying to figure out what to deal with, in that data set. It would have made Starting Block look really, really good, but it also wasn't true or valid. So there's a number of measures that once you go through, and really with all of this, the end goal is to make a more compelling story to foundations and to government to justify investment in the future. So it was based on a lot of our statistics that we had our state government, Wisconsin Development Corporation, actually come to us and say, all right, we want you to be a focal point of the Madison community. How do we further work with you to accomplish that? And I truly believe if we didn't have those stats, it would not occur.
So is there one particular role within Starting Block that is responsible for data gathering?
I am that person. So I hold I'm a member of the executive board, but I also am an entrepreneur in residence with the organization. So most folks realize that I'm the one that is collecting the data. And I will say it is a process. I'll usually get 70%, 75%, just based on, sending 3 emails. And then it usually takes another 15% of companies, it takes, one-on-one calls or, a personal, bump into, hey, you remember to fill out your data? Yeah, your data set. And then there's usually the last 5 to 10, which are usually tricky for other reasons. Either they don't want to share, they have grossly fabricated their data, or they're in the process or currently out of business. So that was also, how do we deal with companies that have since shut down, was also a tricky one to figure out.
So are none of your partners also tasked with job creation numbers that they need to report out on?
So they are bound by our partnership agreements, but simply because they are bound by a piece of paper doesn't necessarily mean someone needs to accurately fill it out. and we are asking for things that are atypical to what they're used to collecting. You also find that not all partners treat data the same way. So even asking how many programs did you do this year? You know, one of our organizations said, well, we don't actually collect that information. How many people showed up to your programs? We don't actually know. So it's forced everyone to sort of hopefully raise the bar into what data is being collected inside the community because of this process. However, I will find out come January whether it actually worked or not.
So it's interesting. I'm thinking about you have your 13 partners or 12 partners in addition to the starting block, but what about the other potential partners or ecosystem actors that are across Madison, like the small business development centers or the universities or the co-starters or those other programs? Are they engaged as well?
So they have their own, so you mentioned the university. You know, the university does collect their various metrics. I mean, it would be a very daunting task to get everyone on the same page, simply after going through, you know, because we do have quite a few ecosystem builders. We're not a small community by any stretch. But then it also becomes the question of what are you going to do with that data and how do you make it effective? One of the reasons why we just pushed forward with the entrepreneur data is after we started actually digging into the ecosystem partners, we started to ask ourselves, why are we actually collecting all of this data? And there were many questions where we were like, maybe this is, you know, people are complaining about this. Maybe we don't collect this piece of data on our ecosystem partners in the building. For an example, there was one question that was inside a federal grant is they wanted to see how much revenue our ecosystem partners were taking in annually. And we had half of our ecosystem partners were very cool sharing that, and another group were certainly not cool sharing that. Again, we were like, well, what would we actually do with this data? And the answer was not much. So on the ecosystem side, we've been really hesitant to expand this beyond the starting block community. On the entrepreneur side, we actually do push to try to get through another organization called Capital Entrepreneurs, which is where this project started, to collect every startup's data, including the very sensitive. That's a totally separate, I mean, it's a partial initiative that now will reside with Starting Block, but we found that to be more valuable because it could be more tangible to our folks in the economic development world than the ecosystem partner data.
I have a
Scott?
question. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah.
I was just going to ask, how did you determine what data to collect?
Would you mind repeating that?
How did you determine what data to collect?
What data to collect? We started with UBI Global Rankings for Entrepreneur Centers. They have a report which is basically what 1871 out of Chicago collects. They have a field of probably about 70 to 80 metrics that they start with, and they have very solid nomenclature and descriptions of each one of those metrics. So we could really get to a definitive reason of why we're collecting each piece of information. Then we started pulling that back and then asking ourselves, do we really need every single statistic here? Many of the pieces, you know, so there were a few areas where we either felt it wasn't relevant or wasn't necessary for many of our entrepreneurs. So a good example of that was how many patents had they filed in the last year? Well, if you're a university, that may make sense, sort of. If you were, you know, I'm sure there are centers that use that as your general attraction, but when we did it with our test pilot entrepreneurs, it was creating more confusion. Similarly, they had a question about product launches that if you're a SaaS-based entrepreneur, they're like, well, we're making updates to our product on a daily basis. How do we mark this? There were also some questions with unique customers that, we just ended up scrapping from the survey, because we really just did ask the question, like, all right, what are we going to do with this data? Does it inform us? Does it can we make better decisions based on it? Let's not collect it just for the sake of collecting it. Because we also wanted to try to create a survey that we could do for our entrepreneurs that they could fill it out within 5 minutes. So we did poll a lot, but we started from the UBI world rankings.
I had another question. You mentioned that, some of your initial funding came from like local foundations. I'm curious what kind of data and metrics they cared more about. Did they care more about the entrepreneurs' data, or were they also curious about the ecosystem builder data?
They cared about jobs. They cared about a narrative. So what does that mean? Really telling the story about the past of Madison, and pushing that narrative forward was really important. So like the center is actually located in a traditional manufacturing district that was where Rayovac essentially created batteries for the U.S. military in World War II. We tied those historical facts quite a bit into the narrative of what we're trying to create with the future of jobs in Madison. The metrics that they wanted to hear from local foundations, it became jobs, number of startups, number of high growth startups, a little bit in the diversity and inclusion, but it was much more about the sell of why entrepreneurship is important to the future of the community. I felt that was way more important than any data points we shared with them.
Makes sense.
I mean, even our largest corporate partner, which was American Family Insurance, part of our pitch very early on, which was to the CEO, which we shared, 87 or 89 years ago, there is an entrepreneur who made an idea that he thought farmers insurance could be, distributed more effectively throughout the United States. And that is what created the $1 billion+ company of American Family Insurance. And now what is going to be the next $1 billion idea that comes out of Madison? That was all within our narrative of how we actually sold, an insurance company to put up, millions of dollars to focus on innovation.
Yeah, that qualitative side is so important, I think, particularly for foundations. Thanks for sharing that.
For sure. So is there any organization, I'm just curious, in Madison that looks at and reports out on the whole ecosystem? Or is that just too wonky because of the size of Madison?
I would say yes and no. So Madison is about 250,000 metro, or 250,000 in the city, 500,000 metro. There are organizations that share out primarily from our local government agency, our regional government agency. What I would say is they don't do an all that effective job of either collecting data, or they either go way too high or way too low. That's where I've relied more closely on a few other organizations. Tom Chapman is probably the one that I rely on the most, from Silicon Prairie News. He is pretty strong at reporting out the general trends of the Madison community, because he's looking at almost all of the major Midwest cities. So we'll do a report, and we'll put some pomp and circumstance to what our report is, but the other regional reports just don't do the topic justice, or they're looking at some glorified statistics that may not represent everyone. So we have a technology council that will focus almost exclusively on the venture capital numbers of the city of Madison and put out an annual report. Well, the reality is those numbers now can be found online in near real time. But jobs numbers, particularly from private companies, I think those are the more valuable numbers, and those are really difficult to track down. And that's sort of the sweet spot that we're trying to fill.
Yeah, I wonder if there, and maybe you guys know more about this, a formula to really get to the real job creation numbers. Because number one, I know from an ecosystem-wide perspective, there are several organizations at times that are claiming the same jobs. And then we don't necessarily know how to take into account the ancillary jobs, if that's the right term, I don't know, that are created or sustained by the supply chain that's local as well.
Exactly. I mean, it is a closer to scientific, and and I won't say scientific. It is an eyeball guess. So like we'll use, when we're actually reporting back about the general Madison ecosystem, we will both use the BLS data, the Bureau of Labor Statistics data for the region, in a couple different key categories, because at the very least we know what companies that's essentially driving from. Software publishing being probably the largest for the Madison region. And then we'll look at some of Eric Moretti's principles on the multiplier effect. The real danger there, and I mean, I will say, I mean, it gets really dangerous because, one, you don't truly know who is local suppliers, and sometimes you will get jobs, unless you can match that with general salary ranges, you get these crazy multipliers, which make your city or community look great until you look around and realize, hey, those jobs I just said are not actually there. So we made an internal decision not to use the multiplier effect in sharing out our jobs numbers, because we're pretty confident when we say our net job numbers. It's a little bit of a different story when we start getting into the multiplier. The other really tricky part is, so we have one food delivery company here in Madison that pays all of its drivers as employees. It's called Eat Street. And like, for example, their numbers, they are a tech company. They've raised 60+ million. They have 3,000 employees. But if you look at it, they actually only have 150 employees at their headquarters here in Madison. And the rest of those, 2,000 plus are just drivers. And clearly, drivers are not having a high multiplier effect. In some cases, even have a negative multiplier effect, even to those who are in Madison. So it is it's really, really hard to get like the actual number of jobs that are created in an ecosystem. Even to get close, it can be a challenge.
Thank you. You mentioned that foundations have contributed to the establishment of Starting Block. Do they continue to fund the organization, and what is their motivation, and is it a story that we should be sharing across the ecosystem building field?
Yeah, so we've had foundation. So the short answer is yes. They have both funded Starting Block's capital campaign and some of its operations. Some of our foundations have different rules and regs on that. So we've actually been pretty heavily weighted in the social impact space. I could actually argue maybe a little too heavily focused on that. And it's primarily because we had several foundations that were very interested in social impact, and they were willing to pay for social impact programming. So that was fine. We ended up complying with it. Some of our more general foundations, really, it was the measurement of talking about what is the future of your community if not for new and thriving small businesses and startups? So, treating it less about some of the high growth companies and focusing more just on startups in general and what that does to your local economy. We took the approach and, at one point, shared, you can do so much for someone that you're trying to provide upward mobility for, but the biggest factor is, can you get that person a job? And using that, some of those lines has been very successful with capturing foundation funding. But there's usually no byline for entrepreneurship for most foundations. I mean, there's a few exceptions to that, but even those we've actually had really low success with. We've only found foundation success inside our region. Also, we had almost no success with some of the local entrepreneurs who have also made tons of money. Their foundations were not as kind to us in our fundraising process, which I don't know what that was about.
That's wild.
Yeah. Epic Systems, you can look at the third wealthiest female founder in the United States, Judy Faulkner, did respond back to our requests to, would you like to learn more about Starting Block? And her answer was no. But at the very least, she got back to me in an email. Then I asked her again 1 year later, and she said, still the answer is no. So yeah, we couldn't get any traction with our folks who have made $1 billion+ due to entrepreneurship. She is richer than Oprah, and we couldn't tap that in. So,
She doesn't want you to steal any of their employees because they all want to leave. Sorry, that's personal matter.
There were so many things we tried. She actually was my roommate in college's godmother, and still there was nothing. So
wow. So how did the foundations, and if I missed this, and you already said it, I apologize, just tell me that.
Yeah.
But how did the foundations that do provide funding, what turned their light bulbs on?
So I think there was there was the right combination of factors all around the same time. There were a number of very public stories around Starting Block. So the project itself was just in the spotlight. We also had a few big raises in the community. We were seeing the results of Judy Faulkner's company in the ecosystem. The narrative around startups was certainly I would sort of say was in the air. So that helped, certainly, that they knew about the project even before we were taking meetings, but even that they knew a little bit about the startup community and the importance of the startup community. We actually had one founder one foundation who shared that if we would have pitched this project 5 years earlier, there would be no way they would make an investment. And they ended up writing a $200,000 check for us for our capital campaign in the end. So part of it is timing, but there was just a general storytelling both about our entrepreneurs in the ecosystem, some of that intentionally by Starting Block, others just by the general media. We weren't seeing almost any national media in that, but at least the local media was pretty front and center.
And that kind of all happened organically. There was no kind of core group of people or organization pushing that narrative. It was just happening serendipitously.
Not really. Yeah, so we did have our Starting Block group. So we did have 11 of us. More than half of us were founders of tech companies that were growing in various size. So that we were controlling some of the narrative. I mean, in retrospect, a lot of other organizations now take credit for creating that narrative. But, if I were to honestly answer that question, it wasn't that the Chamber of Commerce finally discovered entrepreneurship, or this one person inside the regional government now cared and saw a transition and focused on startups. It was way more organic than that, probably by every media outlet, each of the media outlets. Each one wanted some kind of story about startups in general. So, yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I've now looked at as I've worked in a few other ecosystems and seen other projects, having a few folks with general media training, 3 to 5 entrepreneurs who, can speak eloquently on behalf of a community, are using some of the same numbers and facts, and can help and know each other, have relationships, trust each other, and can carry a message. So what ends up happening, which is what was previously happening in Madison, it was our Chamber of Commerce president. He was the one who was the entrepreneur, quote, and shared that narrative. We had another one from our tech council that would probably be in that same boat. Instead of real entrepreneurs on the ground, and their agenda was very different than either of those two. So there is a whole piece of general storytelling to build that awareness campaign. I think we were just fortunate that many of us graduated college at the same time. We stayed in Madison. We stayed in touch. We all started to have kids around the same time. And we're all just generally friends. We don't always agree with each other, but we certainly trust each other and care about each other. So I would say that was a very different flow than I've seen in other communities.
Interesting. That's great. Scott,
and even now, the one last thing is, even now, we do find from our core group other people to expand that group. So like in the media training side, there's a few new entrepreneurs that are now coming to each their own, 2 that just made down to Forbes 30 under 30, a few others. We're now trying to figure out how do we loop them into the same trust network that we had developed, to say, you should stop calling me for quotes. You should call someone else, and particularly highlighting women and people of underrepresented entrepreneurs has been I wouldn't share that publicly, but we've been doing a number of efforts just behind the scenes to try to put more voices, bring more voices to the table, so it's not just the same old names.
Okay. Any other questions or thoughts? This was very informative. Thank you, Scott, for being willing to share. I think we might be able to wrap up early. I just wanted to add around the projects or the initiatives. 6.2, we're still looking for more communities that have run global awareness campaigns internally to their regions. We've heard from NEI from Southeast Michigan. We've heard from Madison now with Scott. And so any other communities that you might know about that we can reach out to and talk to and get their data would be awesome. And then at some point soon, we'd like to find communities that want to apply some of the tools that have been used by other communities in kind of the start of a building of a toolkit, and have these communities pilot an awareness campaign to see what kind of data that we can gather. So thinking about communities or ecosystem builders that we've run into that might have, their community might have the wherewithal to provide some matching funds to do something like that, could get us on our way to really starting to build the case for the need for the larger campaign, right?
Yeah, that'd be so exciting.
Yes. Oh, and I should
Been
share.
for a long time.
What's that?
We've been trying to do that for a long time.
We have. And I should share that there has been a submission to the RFP that Coffin put out around the America's New Business Plan. So if they like what they saw, they'll ask us to submit a detailed proposal in the middle of January. And it's around how global awareness campaigns can really work to influence policy change and the folks that are elected officials or campaigning. So we'll stay tuned to see where that might go. And I think that's it. Any ideas or thoughts around what we'd like to hear about next call, which would be the first Monday in, is it first Monday or second Monday in January? Are we second Monday?
I think we're second Monday.
Yeah.
I think the January call is on the 13th.
Yeah, I unfortunately will be traveling back from a vacation that day, so I'll miss it. So I don't think I should get to vote on what I want to hear about. Well, hopefully we can get Eric on that day since he wasn't able to join us. I think that would be really cool. I love hearing about metrics. It was really great to hear about Scott. So I would just push for that.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. I was on the Goal 5 call last time. I think it was last week for the first time ever. And there's a lot of conversation going on, but I don't know that there's specific work being done on projects yet. Hassan, have you been on those calls more than once? What's your feel?
Yeah, I think you're right about that. I think people are sharing knowledge, but I don't think there's been a lot of work on actual initiatives.
It'd be great if we could start, and maybe they're working on this and we don't know it, but gathering stories like Scott's and others and kind of putting them up beside each other and identifying what really makes sense across the board. And then, of course, different regions would customize their data gathering based on their other needs. But it'd be nice to have that core group of, what is it, the UBI metrics that really are going to mean the most and be meaningful to everyone.
I would totally agree with that. I mean, I will like, taking one hat off, I also was an elected leader for 4 years, which I know some of you on the call are aware of. And it really comes down to those metrics and what you can prove in ecosystem building. So much of it is, I think so many folks treat it as like the fuzzy math and saying, well, it's going to take us 10 years to prove whether what we were doing was successful or not. We've actually been dinged by Kaufman in the past for doing that from one of our grants in Madison a long time ago before I arrived on the scene. But I really think there's an effective way to do metrics, policy storytelling, and then how that flows into tapping into the really large funds from family offices and foundations.
For sure.
It is why I joined this committee. So
cool.
Yeah, let's get Eric on.
Yep. Okay. So that's what we'll work to do for January 13th, is having the Goal 5 report out and discussion. And this was great. Any thoughts? I guess let's popcorn around and just say what you're looking forward to most for Christmas. And I will go to Bia, the quiet one today.
Sorry, been under the weather, but looking forward to, we are going to start planning for our spring entrepreneurship summit, and really a lot of good ideas today. We have that in Ada. We've done it around March, but I really like to have an ecosystem building team. We also have a focus on water technology, so kind of seeing how we can collaborate that and kind of like a water hackathon, followed by the summit. So looking forward to that, and also the holidays. I'll popcorn you, Ben.
Where is
Sorry?
that summit?
It's in Ada, Oklahoma, and that's where I'm based. And and I'm with Ada Jobs Foundation, which is we do economic development, but we have kind of taken the lead on entrepreneurship for the committee. Of course, working with our partners, but we work very closely with the city and our university and the tech center. And it's only been 2 years that we've done the summit, but last year we saw people from all over the state come together, and we're just hoping to kind of expand onto it next year.
Fun.
I'll popcorn to Katie.
Sure. I'm looking forward to not working over the holidays. I'm so excited. You have no idea. I'm ready for a vacation, and it's going to be nice to just stay in Madison for the holidays. So that's what I'm looking forward to. Don't need to say any more. I'll go to Beth.
Same here. I just love the week in between Christmas and New Year's where nobody's expected to do anything really, except for maybe do a little after shopping. But yeah, I can't wait to really have that quiet time. And I'll go to Hassan.
So I'm looking forward to downtown as well, just reflecting on the last year, basically. Just being able to gather my thoughts.
And?
I will go over to Scott.
So I am moving homes over the Christmas holiday. So I am going to be very excited to be done with the Christmas holiday. When it's all said and done, you acquire a lot of trash when you move from an apartment to a home to a second home. I do not envy anybody who's deciding to move, and I'm not sure why we're doing it over Christmas, but it will be done, and I will be looking forward to being the holidays and being moved in once it's over.
Also, Scott is moving offices at the same time. So, right, Scott?
I'm moving into starting block tomorrow. So, yeah, really bad planning. So, on my part.
Wow. Well, everybody have a great holiday season. Thanks for being here, and keep looking for those stories. Talk to you soon.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.